What the author of the book has to do, since you already own the book, that's yours, it's on a shelf, no one can touch that. You have to, if you're smart, I think, help in every way you can to allow that director to fulfill his vision of how your book can be turned into a different art form. It's not the same art form. You can't say, wait a minute, that wasn't in my book, I want it in the movie. Well, get out of there. You can do all you want to do in the book. Don't leave the movie alone. Let the director do it. Now, it's easy for me to say, because I'm working with Martin Scorsese. A lot of directors aren't maybe up to it, and a lot of writers kind of are ready to throw themselves off bridges because of that. I had the exact opposite experience. It was really a fascinating experience to watch.
You got a phone? Come on. You got a phone? It's over there. 2 niggers just stole my truck. Can you believe that shit, huh? Can you fucking believe that?
Director of photography, Michael Ballhaus.
It's the introduction shot of the team, of the people who are working with them. It was, in a way, a little more complicated because it had a lot of people who had to say their lines at the right moment, and that took a couple of takes. But it was another Steadicam shot. You know, after a couple of takes, we figured out when they had to say their lines, and they said it all to the camera, so they know when the camera was on them. So it wasn't easy, because all these shots are not easy to do, but we always got it, and not in a tremendous amount of time.
I thought it was kind of nice to just open up and say, this is where we are, and this is who we are, and this is where we live. Oh, by the way, that's my friend, and that's him, and that's her, and this person, and this is what they do. And to be really open with the audience rather than going through a kind of convoluted narrative, traditional narrative, conventional narrative, I should say, not traditional, but sort of conventional narrative. And I thought I wanted to dismiss with all that, do away with all that. And that was, not only the Fellini's particularly Vitelloni, no doubt. I did it in Mean Streets too. And it comes a little bit from a Vitelloni, but it comes from a certain style, not just a Vitelloni. A Vitelloni I saw after I saw Nights of Cabiria, after I saw La Dolce Vita, after I saw Divorce Italian Style. Then Vitelloni was shown around in the early 60s, and that was a film made in the early 50s. And it hit me, to be honest about it, and just say, look, actually Mean Streets, quite honestly, is a picture that was heavily influenced by Vitelloni. But in any event, that style was happening. There was a kind of freedom. Because introducing a character was not as important to do it conventionally. It would take up too much time conventionally. We had other things to talk about. We had other things to show. And I wanted to get past that. And so I did it in Mean Streets, and certainly in Goodfellas, although I felt it was a repetition. But I did it a different way, I thought. And what was important about that shot in Goodfellas was that it was like the nostalgia of a world filled with gods. You know, this guy who had been up there with the gods up in Olympus and then was cast down. But he'd look back and he'd say, there was Jimmy 2 times, you know. And he'd go, disreputable characters all, but in his mind as a young person, they were gods. And, and great warmth and affection between them all. And even though within maybe a year or two they'd be shooting each other.
Beautiful. What about the security? No, security? You're looking at it. It's a joke. I'm the Midnight Date Man. I'm the commandant. He just comes in like he's picking up lost baggies with Tommy D. It's beautiful. Yeah, I don't think it's a problem at all. Huh? We're on.
The issue with the improv is that it was then rewritten by one of the writers, who was me. But there were certain areas we wanted to open up. I'll use that word, open up. For example, Pesci wanted to do the scene of provoking Henry, saying, do you think I'm funny? Why do you think I'm funny?
Ray Liotta.
Was in rehearsal, we were talking, and Joe was telling a story about he was with somebody, and the guy was saying something funny, and it's something that happened to him.
It supposedly is a true situation. I know that to a certain extent, I mean, just the way he moves and what he says, I know it's true. So Pesci has too much of a familiarity with what happens in that scene. It's too real. And then I took the transcripts and re-edited the transcripts to make it the scene, which was then inserted into the script. And that was very carefully worked on the set at the Hawaii Kai restaurant on 49th Street and Broadway, wherever it is. I don't know if it's still there. It was above the place that always showed Cats. Cats was there for like 100 years. The Winter Garden Theater was above there. And that day we did that, and I remember that it started to go another way, and I kept saying, no, you got to go back to the script based on what was rewritten. And because he had already hit those levels, Joe, and we needed those levels. Otherwise, if you look at the scene, it could be very sloppy. You know, he could just say, what do you think, I'm funny? And it can go on like that for ages. But there's something there's something in each question and response from Ray that raises the ante until it gets to the point where Ray has no choice but to call him on it. He calls him on it. What could he lose? He's either going to get killed or he's going to get hugged. If he's going to get killed there, he might get killed the next day. So he's got no choice. These are his guys. These are his people. And everybody's looking at him. And it's a ballsy thing to do, to call him on it and say, get out of here. He says, I had you there for a second. He just makes it barely by the skin of his teeth. In a split second, he could be killed. But if he doesn't do that, if he doesn't call Joe Pesci on that, I don't think he could show his face. He's dead another way. You know. And if you look at the two-camera setup, it was very important that the film was not widescreen, was not 2:3:5 aspect ratio. It was not Panavision or anamorphic, I should say. I was still shooting 1:8:5, normal widescreen. But I packed the frame with everybody around Joe and packed the frame with everybody around Ray because there were no close-ups. Because a close-up would isolate them. What's happening in the scene is something that is essential to that way of life. That is intrinsic, I should say, to that way of life, not essential. It is that way of life, that scene. And you have to see the effect on the people around them. You have to see when I think one Frank Adonis says, he was just saying, no, he's a big boy, he could talk for himself. All right. But Ray's character, Henry, has got no choice but to say, come on, yeah, you know, take a chance. What's the worst he could do? If he's going to try to kill you, you can maybe duck, you could punch him, some guys would say, there are a lot of guys there, they'll probably separate him, you know what I'm saying? I mean, so but if he doesn't do that, he doesn't have the balls to do it. He's a dead man in that group, in a sense, socially. He won't be invited to the next dinner party, you know.
Director of photography, Michael Ballhaus.
We had like two cameras rolling, and it was exciting what developed in this scene. All of a sudden, the tension that developed, it was scary, really.
And that was shot very quickly. And then about 5, maybe 8 takes, but hard to cut because we had to keep hitting those levels. And every now and then it'd go off to another level, and it didn't quite hit right. And it's just not natural. In different takes, things would happen. And so we had to keep constructing back to the way it was written.
Editor, Thelma Schoonmaker.
Comic timing, which is something we had to learn on several films, like After Hours and King of Comedy. We learned a lot that comedians actually count when they are responding to each other, because they've worked out that it's absolutely crucial for you to wait just a certain fraction of a second more and you'll get a bigger laugh. George Burns always said that Gracie Allen was one of the masters of comic timing. And Jerry Lewis was that way when he was working on King of Comedy. Yeah.
Who knows better than you? This cocksucker's an arch criminal. I mean, when I leave my house in the morning, before I get to the car, I'm looking over both shoulders. This is no way to live. You know I'm no fence jump. I'm around you all my life. You tell me what I gotta do. Whatever the fuck I gotta do, I'm gonna do, no? What could I do?
The construction of the script, I've forgotten how it worked, but I must say, it was more than a blueprint because it was a very, very solidly constructed, even the freeze frames, through the voiceover. And then I started making pictures through the voiceover, and Nick would work out the scene that the voiceover, that another part of the book described, and then I would say, but that's so wonderful in the description of the voiceover, let's use that voiceover over that scene, etc. And so it was very clearly constructed that way, every shot.
Because he knew what the movie looked like, he would say, now this scene, I want this, think window, think we're in a window, because I want the scene to be in a window, I want to be looking out the window at something. You see, you are really writing what is basically a shooting script for the director who will be shooting the movie. It is probably the only way to really write a movie. Of course, you can never do it because it's so rare when that can ever happen. But a film, it was an education to me, because a film is so clearly the vision of the director. You know, he picks the cast, he picks the movie, he picks the color and the tone. I mean, it is his book, it's his painting.
In fact, when I shot the film, except for opening up the story at times for dialogue that we felt we could add, myself being one of the co-writers, could add, primarily in rehearsal, really. Except for those moments. The rest of the film, I was usually in a very grumpy mood during the film because it had already been done. It was on the page. I mean, it seems presumptuous, but what I mean is that I knew where it was going, but what I had to do was control and wrangle the actors to give me more than what was on the page. But we knew that at least we had the page. We can always fall back to that.
Barbara DeFina.
We had done Color of Money, and he was supposed to do Goodfellas, I think next, or certainly before Last Temptation, and the opportunity to do Last Temptation came along, so Goodfellas got put aside to do Last Temptation. So the script for Goodfellas was finished long before the movie went into pre-production, which is very unusual, actually, for Marty.
You take a $200 case of booze and you sell it for $100. Doesn't matter, it's all profit. And then finally, there's nothing left.
Fucking shame.
Producer Irwin Winkler.
Marty likes to have suggestions from everyone, so he has a very open set. The actors are invited to bring themselves into the film. Michael Ballhaus is someone that always has suggestions, and Marty comes thoroughly prepared. When the day starts, he has sketches and shot lists and everything else, and then within that menu, you might call it, there's a tremendous amount of improvisation because he knows the parameters of what he wants to say and do. So that allows him to change things as people come up with ideas, whether it's a cameraman or a prop man, a set designer. He'll take all this and very often put it on film and then decide later on what he wants to do. Don't forget, Marty was originally an editor. So that's the process he likes to go through. It taught me a great deal because I directed my first film right after that, right after Goodfellas. And I learned two things in that regard is be prepared, tell everybody what you're planning on doing, and then when you get there, do whatever you think is best at that moment. So you have your parameters, but then the freedom to work within those parameters.
Hey, I'm trying to bang this fucking broad. You want to help me out? I don't understand you. What? She's fucking beautiful. Her fucking family, they live in a fight.
In the book, in the book, when he talked about going to the Copa and being treated like royalty at the Copacabana, that was important to me because I grew up in the same world to a certain extent. Different part of the city, of course, and I don't know who they were aligned with, you know what I'm saying, but I grew up in the same thing, so that the Copacabana for us, at the age of 10 years old to, don't forget, in the early 50s, the Copa was the New York nightlife, some of the greatest acts opened there. Martin and Lewis, it was quite something at the time, the early 50s, so that there was still like the top of the line. You couldn't get any higher to go in there and be treated like a king. Because I know we used to go there as teenagers, and we'd go on a Saturday night, maybe if we can get in, and we get a table, and then of course it was always in the back, or if we got closer to the stage, we were all very happy, but within 5 minutes before the show started, other tables came flying in. They looked like they were flying by themselves, in a sense, of their own volition. And these big hulking guys would sort of sit in front of us. We couldn't see anything. My high school prom that night, we went to see Bobby Darin at the Copa, and we had a table right behind him, so to speak. But at least we could turn and see him, But that was a very special place. And one of my close friends, his father was the bartender at the Copa Lounge, which is on the main floor, and that was used in Raging Bull, and we had him in the bar, and we actually got the bar back, the actual bar, put it back in there in 1979 when we shot him. Mickey was the bartender, and we mention his name in the film. He's called by one of the characters, Mickey, give me a double scotch. In any event, so being the bartender there, his son, who was a close friend of mine, who was the only intellectual in the neighborhood. He was a very nice kid. He's dead now. Learned a lot from him. He would read a lot. There were no books in my house, but he had books in his. He would read, and so once a month they were allowed, because he was the bartender. They would have him. They would give him gratis a night to go with his family to see the show, and so Dominic would come back and tell me about Sinatra and tell me about all the different players there, Tony Bennett and everybody. So it was a very special place for us, and the lounge even more so, because the lounge is it's kind of a Valhalla in a way of New York nightlife. It was really this paradise of New York nightlife in our minds as kids. And so the idea was that the ones in the lounge looked upon those going to see the show with almost disdain. See, the lounge was enough, you know.